Energy poverty means lack of opportunities, lack of development, lack of healthcare options, lack of education opportunities. But today, we have to look global south from a perspective of not just energy poverty, but energy poverty that's aggravated by climate change impacts. So that's a vicious cycle. Enough of listening, start acting.
Hello and welcome to the second episode of our Venro podcast about Agenda 2030 and the 17 goals, the Sustainable Development Goals we committed to achieve within the framework of the agenda. My name is Katharina Linnepe and TikTok, that's the name of this podcast, which means time is running out and we're still miles away from achieving the SDGs. So the greatest efforts are needed in many areas. One of these areas is energy and climate, and the question how we can achieve global climate neutrality in a fair, in a fast, and in a funded way. Keywords here are energy poverty and just transition. And today we would like to talk about this with Anand Prabu. He is Partnerships and Camping Manager for the international NGO Power for All, which advances renewable, decentralized electrification solutions in less developed countries as the most sustainable approach to universal energy access. Anand lives and works in Johannesburg in South Africa. So, hello Anand, we are very happy to have you.
Hi, Katrina. Nice to see you. And it's great to be here. And thanks for having me here as well.
Yeah, thank you. So for the start, let's talk a bit about the COP28, because it was not that long ago that it took place, the UN Climate Change Conference in Dubai. And yeah, what do you think? What do the results, the decisions of the COP28 mean for just transition, and especially with regard to overcoming energy poverty? Can you give us a bit of an insight into that and maybe your ideas on it?
Thank you. COP28 in Dubai was definitely a historic one, but I would say it's still inadequate. That would sum up my view on the outcomes of COP28. It was historic because the COP consensus that was finally agreed by the different governments, there were many climate firsts. The first endowment for the loss and damage fund, the first goal for renewable energy efficiency, the first mentions of transitioning away from fossil fuels as a consensus globally, and the first just transition framework cutting across all climate activities. But what's happening today, what happened in COP, I don't think that's going to be sufficient to make sure we meet our 2030 SDG goals. I think that's where the part of gap is, where we are today, and 2030 is just around the corner. As you know, that there are more than 700 people still lack access to electricity, and about 2.3 billion people rely on harmful cooking fuels for their livelihoods. So we are still not in a position globally to reduce this number by 2030. We are halfway crossed the 2030 milestone, and we have not done it. There's not been enough consensus on how are we dispersing global finance into effectively implementing in a timely manner development projects in the global south to bring these people out of energy poverty.
Yeah, right. So thank you very much for giving us some context here. So historical decisions, but not enough. And you already gave us some facts and figures. And now let's dive a bit deeper into the meaning of global energy access and of energy poverty. Can you tell us what are the concrete effects of energy poverty on vulnerable populations, women, children, indigenous communities? How does energy poverty affect their lives and their different spheres of lives?
Energy poverty is a complex subject because energy is needed for a lot of activities in today's day and age, and it's linked to almost 7 or 8 of the 17 SDGs altogether.
Yeah.
And energy poverty on a standalone basis means lack of opportunities, lack of development, lack of healthcare options, lack of education opportunities. But today, we have to look global south from a perspective of not just energy poverty, but energy poverty that's aggravated by climate change impacts. So that's a vicious cycle that leads to, I mean, most of the farmers in global south are energy poor. So this is going to have increased food loss, increased migration, increased loss of livelihoods, which in turn is going to impact women and children. And this vicious cycle continues on a bigger scale with the more catastrophic impacts like droughts, floods in the global south. So it is a paradigm of impact and not looking at it from an energy poverty standpoint of view alone, but what's the overall socio-economic impact of energy poverty plus climate change impact in the global south.
Right. So a huge, huge impact that we can see. Okay. So even if we can see some progress, there are still more than 700 million people without access to energy worldwide. So in your opinion, what are the most important challenges to overcome energy poverty globally? Which are the most important challenges within that?
I would say there is still not a level playing field for renewable energy and decentralized renewable energy in the global energy stage. Just for numbers, data from IEA shows that renewable energy mini grids are the most time effective and least cost solution for the energy poor, those who are in energy poverty, to be uplifted. And the same data also shows only 13% of the 1.6 billion committed to the mini grid industry to de-risk projects have been deployed since 2020. So the amount of money that is committed and the amount of money that's being dispersed, we don't have the time to wait 2 or 3 years for projects to be financed, to projects to sustain, to get people out of poverty. And that's something very important. And that's today very critical, especially from a global south perspective, from a sub-Saharan Africa perspective. And DRE technologies only make up less than 1% of the overall 212 US billion committed to the electricity sector in the global south. So it's far less money. It's taking more time. And this is just adding on to the existing barriers. The existing barriers are the policy, regulatory, and finance that are crippling the different energy policies and energy sectors in the global south.
Yeah, right. Okay. Maybe we can talk a bit more about, as you said, the perspectives of the global north, perspectives of the global south. And here, maybe we could talk about decisions made in the global north regarding import strategies and investments in fossil energy and what impact that has on the global south and the just energy transition in the global south. Can you describe us this connection and this impact to get a clear image on this connection and this impact?
Historic impacts of import strategies. Let's say it's the free trade laws, the globalization, the standardization of technologies, equipments. I think this has impacted. It has pros and cons, but when it comes to renewable energy and sustainable development technologies, it has impacted global south in a way that it was not able to develop its own technologies in the past. And now with fossil fuel technology specifically, in the global south, there are a lot of imported technologies, be it fossil fuel, be it nuclear energy, depending on the continents and which part of global south we are from. But now we are in an age of transition. Now we are all aiming towards global transition goals, 2050, 2070. There are going to be a lot of stranded assets. The investments done by World Bank and other agencies in the global south in these technologies to train people to develop communities around fossil fuel based communities. Now it's a challenge to transition. And we are talking about large chunks of population, large amount of jobs, and large amount of stranded assets. And this technology change or just transfer and adaptation, it's a huge burden for the local governments in the global south. They are not equipped to deal with that at the moment. And this is going to take time. And as you know, I mean, as you see that most of the global South energy transition goals are in 2070s and 2060s, and many might not even committed to energy transition goals, apart from a handful. But if you see the global north, it's all 2040, 2050, under before the mid-century. But the others, it's taking more time because of the manpower and the finance needed because of this stranded assets and import strategies by the global north. And one thing to add over here is the importance of the Nairobi Declaration that was declared in the Africa Climate Week last year, where President Ramaphosa from South Africa said, what Africa needs is a level playing field and not charity from the global north. I think that was something that was very clearly, and it resonated quite well because Africa is not in a position, I mean, Africa, including global south, is not in a position today that we need charity, but it's more of giving a level playing field and chance to catch up and be on the level playing field to reach energy poverty goals and SDG goals by 2050 or 70.
Right. Yeah. Thank you very much. So let's talk a bit about sustainable and fair development cooperation. And I think we all know that this cooperation always has to be integrated into the local reality or the local realities. So I think it's actually not a question of why, but more a question of how civil society organizations and local populations should and could be involved in the implementation of a just energy transition. Can you give us maybe even some examples of best practice, as we often say, where this has been successfully implemented?
I think, the cooperation between civil society organization, local population, and governments and bilateral organizations and funding organizations is quite critical for localized development and localized sustainability. That's definitely happening in the last couple of years. I mean, last decade, there have been a lot of measures being implemented with the involvement of even global organizations, including, let's say, Power for All. We work locally in Uganda, in Ethiopia, in India, in Kenya, and Nairobi, in Nigeria as well, working with local civil society partners and government players to ensure that there are proper practices in place and also trainings and skill development in place to make sure that the local people are, I mean, end of the day, they are the end users. When it talks about any kind of development programs, the end user is usually the most affected, and getting them involved and getting their inputs is very crucial for all programs. And one such program, I would say, is the Utilities 2.0 program. It is a mini-grid model of a program that won the Ashton Awards last year. And the idea of it was in Uganda, there's a huge electrification problem. And we worked with the local utility and the solar mini-grid developer and the productive use appliance provider and the community as well to make sure that for 2 years to almost 3 years, to ensure that the community has understood the technology, is driven by the technology to increase their demand, thereby being productive community in terms of electricity usage. And then that was handed over to the utility, where the utility can connect to a profit-making or a demand-driven community. So main challenges when it comes to utility expansion is the utilities don't want to expand to a community or society where there's no demand. So it's a loss-making expansion. So we had to intervene, brought together all the stakeholders for almost 6 to 8 months, had various rounds of meetings to ensure that the community is on board and was part of the mini-grid system for almost 2.5, 3 years, where they were encouraged to use more and thereby generating revenue through productive use applications. And then the utility took over and thereby is now a sustainable model. This was similarly a case in India. Maybe a different transition was from a just transition lens, the aspect of clean air and air pollution. There was a huge community of civil society partners. I mean, air pollution was the entire awareness about air pollution and monitoring was very new 5 years ago in India. But today, every state, every district has an air pollution monitoring system because of the awareness created by not just the civil society sector, but parents of children, by teachers, by educational institutions, to increase the awareness around clean air and what it means for healthier livelihood and what it means for sustainability of a clean city and smart city. So two aspects of just transition, but the same aspect that everybody needs to be involved and come together to make a long lasting change.
Right. Everyone needs to come together, right? Speaking of that, and now we are slowly approaching the end of our podcast episode. Let me ask you once again, as maybe the closing words for this podcast interview, how it can be ensured that the voices of those affected by energy poverty are really, really heard, and that energy infrastructures are locally adapted. What is your opinion on that? What is the most important thing to get their voices be heard?
I would say two things. I mean, first thing is, to be very blunt, is we are in a stage where I would say enough of listening, start acting. So I think, as I said, earlier, we have crossed the halfway mark of the 2030 goal. We know that its 2030 goals are going to be hard to achieve at this rate. Rather than listening to the voice of the energy poor, start investing, start acting, start coming together and making sure that local technologies and technologies that are feasible, adaptable, and readily available implemented so that the 700 million, at least by 2030, they are 300 million. We are not going to eradicate 700 million of global poor, energy poor people by 2030, but at least can we make it to half? I think that should be the goal right now. But in order to amplify the voices of the affected, the solutions show us the impact of local solutions at everywhere possible in all the conferences, in forums, especially to investors and funders who still feel technologies are not reliable. There is so much of red tape and bureaucracy around granting funds and timelines. How do you ensure that these funds are easily available? I think that's to raise the awareness to the funders and beneficiaries about the solutions that are available in the local markets. And people are ready to embrace new technologies. People are ready to come out of poverty. It's just that the means for it needs to be made available. I think that's where I want to close my remarks at.
Right. Thank you so much, Anand. Thank you so much for your thoughts, for your information, and of course for this very, very interesting interview. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katrina.